What Kalshi does is take super forecasted information and it puts it together in our market. And so the informational value that you get out of Kalshi is phenomenal. The predictive value of the markets that we get out of Kalshi is phenomenal. We have a measurement and the measurement is something called a Brier score. And what a Brier score does is it measures how good a model's output is versus true events. And the Federal Reserve have actually written about the fact that Kalshi's data is so good that they're going to use it in their own analysis in terms of CPI and interest rates, for example. We're starting to see block trades occur. We're starting to see institutional people trading on the market based around the retail prices because there's a sense that these are really good prices. There's a sense that these are high quality prices. Something like a meteorology model, so something like whether the rain is going to fall tomorrow or whether it's going to be sunny tomorrow. You might have a Brier score on those of say 0.1, which means roughly 90% of the time they'll be about 90% right. It's a very rough way to explain that. Take Kalshi data on any market that's had over $55,000, $60,000 traded on it. 1 month out, 1 month, the Brier score is 0.05, which means about 95% of the time it's about 95% right. And so that is just a phenomenal indicator of value.
What is the most valuable use case for prediction markets?
We listed a product recently in California, and the product we listed in California was about, well, we listed it on our market, obviously, but the product was a Californian tax rebate, and it was to do with solar power credits in California. We priced the market using the super forecasters that priced the market, and then institutionals hedged a risk that they couldn't have hedged otherwise. So first use case, we've got people who are on a corporate level trading, that was about $600,000 worth of risk transfer on whether the price of something was going to be higher or lower rebate. And so what's interesting about that is that that was unhedgeable prior to that point. Or if it was hedgeable, you were phoning up a broker and you're getting something to happen with a bank in a swap. Entirely transparent bilateral risk. Kalshi moved all of that into on-screen price liquidity, displayed liquidity, where the price in the market is then displayed post-trade and cleared to a central counterparty. So we've got a use case where we've taken a risk that was previously perhaps unhedgeable or only hedgeable in a very bespoke, expensive way and put it into a very simple contract that allowed people to trade it. We had a bar that chose to run a promotion on the Knicks, and the bar said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to give people free food and drink if the Knicks win. Well, they actually laid the risk by generating a fixed cost promotion because they took a position out on Kalshi on the Knicks, which then enabled them to be hedged in terms of the cost of their promotion versus the bar bill and the food bill for people that night. Futures started by supporting, Chicago, the growth of the futures industry started by supporting people who are like hedging, grain. But the power of those futures is now galvanized in only a very few liquid products. So take commodities, there's probably 3,000 commodities, but only 30 odd of them really trade. And so the ability for you to hedge idiosyncratic risk around interesting other products is really interesting, I think, for us in the market.
How have you adapted to accommodate institutional volume?
I see a huge distinction between what I consider as onshore regulated markets and offshore unregulated markets. By being onshore and being regulated, I actually think it's a commercial advantage, not least that people like to face a regulated entity. We have a market in Bitcoin, and one of the markets we have in Bitcoin is, will the price of Bitcoin at the end of the day be higher or lower? But what we do is we take a TWAP of a minute of 3 exchanges to generate the price of Bitcoin that we reference. And we publish that in the rules. That's super interesting because everybody in futures markets would know that this concept of banging the close so you could manipulate a market. It's really hard to bang a close if you're taking a TWAP of a minute on 3 different exchanges. And so for us, that's the really interesting product design context. So follow the CFTC rules, really cool because the rules are really well written and really good. And secondly, you've got to design your contracts to make them as unmanipulatable as possible. And that means having averages, throwing out extremes, having very clear resolution criteria so that you and everybody else knows. Say a market where somebody is going to be coach of a team, for instance, next year. If that person unfortunately tragically dies, I don't think it's right that the market, or we don't think it's right that the market then pays out like that they're not going to be the in charge of the team next year. Partly because that's not right, and partly because I don't want to create any perverse incentives for bad behavior. And so actually designing products that have a really robust, clear set of hierarchy of rules of how it works, fallbacks and procedures. So for instance, in our inflation market, we had fallbacks about what would happen if the US government didn't produce an inflation figure, and then in the shutdown it didn't produce an inflation figure. So you have to design your contracts in such a way as to ensure that when they're resolved, everybody knows beforehand.
How has public skepticism and industry criticism from figures like John Lothian shaped your growth?
Most criticism and most engagement is actually to be welcomed. If you assume that you know everything and there's nothing to be learned, that's a really bad position to be in. And I think that some of John's criticism and critique I would agree with, much of it I do not. And so we have robust conversations about the fact that there are some things that value add and some things that are not. I value that. I think the other thing that is a really important point for me, markets are evolving. You know, I sat here at IDX and I've talked, which is why my voice has gone, but IDX, and we've talked about so many things, but the theme that I would talk about that's been here is about 24-hour markets, and the other theme is about new exchanges and new things. The reality is, what's been super impressive to me as an Englishman, as a European, is the US's focus on bringing innovation to America. Perpetuals traded $90 trillion offshore last year, and American institutions and American retail users didn't have access to that market. It traded $90 trillion offshore. Bring it onshore, fit it inside the CFTC's regulated markets, and it actually makes the market safer, and it makes a standard of that, and actually makes it better for US consumers and US corporations or investment firms that want to get access to it. And so I applaud the fact that innovation's occurring onshore, and I applaud the fact that it's occurring within a regulated framework. And actually, some people didn't like it when the Eurodollar was created. Some people didn't like it when OTC clearing occurred and we had to clear swaps. Some people didn't like CDS and so on and so forth. But actually the development of all of those markets has had some tangible, both human productivity gains for society and risk management gains. And I think these examples that I gave earlier on about micro hedges, about corporations being able to do things, about individuals being able to trade on different products, is hugely exciting in that ability to both understand the world, have better data about it, but hedge risk and manage risk in a different way.
Do prediction perpetuals and traditional futures complement or compete with each other?
I think futures are an amazing product, and I've run futures execution business and futures clearing businesses, and I've run a futures exchange, so I would never dish futures. And what I think they are amazing at is bringing liquidity to one point, and also a 1 point on one product, but 1 point on one time. So it allows you to hedge your risk to a certain point. So is something going to cost some more money? And so perhaps, for instance, oil, I'm going to hedge a delivery because I've got something that I want to do. I'm going to buy some jet fuel, or whether I want to put a jet fuel hedge on, or I'm going to, those are specific contracts that you want to trade and hedge because you need to do that on a forward path, right? You've got, you want an airline, you want to manage that risk on a calendar spread. Totally understand that is a really sensible, viable use of a futures market. However, they're very big size. They're not particularly designed for retail users, and even the minis are not particularly designed for retail users. Where Kalshi is positioning itself is alongside that. I think competing with, perhaps, but actually I think it's about saying with a perpetual, you just have this ability to go long or short. So with a prediction market, you're going whether you think something is going to go up or down, but you're also saying whether it's going to go up or down by a certain point in time. With a perpetual, it's even cleaner than that. You're just saying whether it's going to go up or down. The perpetuals are really a good tool to manage your exposure to something if you think that it's going to go up, or you have some exposure if something goes up. But for many people, that's not an appropriate risk hedge. For others, it really is. And so I don't think it's for anybody to define what's the appropriate risk hedge. The appropriate risk hedge should sit within a regulatory framework so that the client money is locked up, so that you're complying with supervision of the market, so that you don't have people insider trading, whatever the important jurisdictional and control points of a market are within a regulated framework. You've got a clearinghouse that's managing risk, so that if one party defaults, you don't get some auto-deleveraging or something like that, or the market moves and you get auto-deleveraging, right? You don't have any of those type of risks. with a classic risk structure like you would have on Kalshi or CME or ICE, for instance.
Are you adjusting your market microstructure to handle larger institutional trade sizes?
I think there are points where we need to enhance liquidity. We put a liquidity scheme out, for instance, to allow people to trade blocks until the end of September, I believe it was, and not pay fees on Kalshi to do that. And that's to sort of grow this block market that I was talking about. So I think there are things we need to do on liquidity, adding more liquidity on the front months, and I think there are things we need to do on leverage. And ultimately, prediction markets currently are fully funded. If you think right, that something's going to happen and I think it's not going to happen, our total size of the contribution, you might put 20 in, I put 80 in, it's got to equal $1. And so we put that into the market straight up, and so there is no leverage. But we would love to, over time, add leverage, but that is obviously CFTC dependent, and it would only be for certain contracts and certain designs. And so the point about that, why that is interesting for institutional people, is you start to generate a curve.
Where will Kalshi be in 5 years?
I'd love to see Kalshi sponsor IDX. We see the CME standard. I think absolutely Kalshi is working with institutional partners and players to be part of that ecosystem. It's equally important for us to be considered an institutional play as it is to be considered a retail play. And I think that what John would admit to is, look at all those use cases that have been discovered. It's not by Kalshi discovering them, it's all the users of Kalshi who come to us and ask us to develop product with them. We'll say, look at all those institutional users that have asked us to develop product. Aren't we in such a better world now where we've got way more risk transparency, way more risk hedging, and way more risk pricing than we ever thought about before? And I think that is just a huge benefit for society. It allows people to make better decisions every single day, and that is a tangible benefit.
What advice do you have for young people entering the industry?
I'd learn how to use the AI tools that are available. Our educational establishment doesn't encourage kids to lose the IT tools that are available, but that's because it's designing kids to sit in jobs that existed 40 years ago rather than jobs that are existing in 20 years' time, and that's a shame for the kids who are currently going through education. And so I'd want all of the kids to learn about that. Everyone should be able to Claude code. Everyone should understand how Coworker works. These are very basic tools that you should just be able to have. Vibe code a web page. Just become skilled. You don't have to do a diploma in this. Go learn. Look online. There's an amazing amount of free learning that you can get online. In completely juxtaposition to that, I'd play as much sport as you can. Sport is phenomenal for two reasons. One, it makes you fitter and healthier, which is just a life hack. And if anyone doesn't want to be fitter and healthier, that's just a really bad realign yourself. Live longer, be healthier, have a better mate. These are all important things in society. So to play more sport. But ultimately, when you play sport, whether that is, and I would generally say team sports, but even to the extent of joining a running club, whatever, you are with other people, and you get to learn how to interact with other people in stressful situations, in difficult situations, and it teaches you resilience. I think you've got to continue to think about networking. In a previous role, I sponsored an apprenticeship scheme where people came onto a trading floor and learned how to be traders and salespeople while getting a degree-like certificate. I think those are phenomenally opportunistic ways of entering both job markets and entering early years life.